Welcome to the Forge, my wanton wildlings. I'm your creepsmith, and I hope you like my work. There's been a long-standing trope that creativity and insanity share a close relationship. In fact, for some not familiar with the skill and technique involved, art may even seem magical. But, as is usually the case, if you inject magic into the mundane world, there is a price, and that price is most often paid in human capital. Tonight's story, The Art of Jacob Emory, by Douglas Greenwood, or Peter Devine, depending on who you ask. Hey there. Come on in. Grab a chair. What's that? Ghost stories? Nah, we don't have anything like that around here. We do have the story of Jacob, but that's about as close as you're gonna get. You really want to know? Well, I'm not supposed to tell you. But alright, just no interrupting. I don't have the patience for it. How to describe Jacob Emory? Well, I guess you could say he was the kind of guy that you'd probably never notice. This isn't to say he was a bad kid, not in any sense. Most of the people in town thought he was the most reliable person for an odd job in the entire state. But he never really excelled in any one thing. He was the living proof behind the statement, jack of all trades, ace of none. That was mostly due to his own lack of will. He dabbled in damn near everything this town could offer him. Automobiles, radio operations, store management, whatever he could get his hands on, but he never really stuck with anything. His friends and workers went after him about it a number of times, but everybody just got the same unsatisfying response. It wasn't enough. Needless to say, any friends that he kept were either very patient or they never talked to him about it altogether. It was probably inevitable that Jacob would leave, go abroad. I don't remember where he went, but if you're curious, I think Gertrude down the street knew before she passed on. You'll have to scout someone else if you ever get curious. Maybe they'd have heard it from her. In any case, no one tried to stop him. Everybody thought a little travel would either stamp that ambition out of him or else feed it until it became no longer an issue. Hell, we even gave him a sending off party, which I thought was pretty nice of everybody. So anyway, he was gone for 6, 7 years? Can't remember. You'll have to check with someone else about that too. Anyways, he came back eventually, and he had obviously changed. He was amiable, energetic, all smiles all the time, and we quickly learned why. He pulls a few of us aside and shows us this souvenir that he'd brought back. A solid black stick, the length of a pencil, but texture of chalk. We all wondered why on earth such a simple thing would prompt such a spring in his step, until he gave us a demonstration. He took a piece of paper, and with this stick, God, there's got to be a better word for it. And with the stick, he drew a crude circle, and it dropped, rested on the border of the paper like a stone. It didn't leave the paper, but it acted out on it sort of like an old movie projector on a screen. Now, son, I know how crazy that sounds, and if you feel like playing skeptic, then you can leave this old man to his craziness, but I know what I saw, even if everyone has been hushing it up. And that stone he drew dropped. Jake even passed around the paper, and as it was being passed, it rolled around as the paper got tilted one way or the other. None of us had any words for it. I mean, hell, what was there to say? But he continued drawing demonstration after demonstration for us. Stick figures in pageants and plays, doing everything from fighting to making perfect human pyramids. We all thought it was incredible. Now, that was all the go-ahead he needed. He announced that he planned to put on shows to pay for rent and food, and he could draw anything the crowd members wanted. Now that we talked some length about, and he eventually convinced us that it would be safe. His drawings would be ethical, the practice would be lucrative, and obviously it'd be unique. The attention wouldn't go anywhere outside of the town's borders. Oh, poor Jake. If I hadn't been so swept up in the moment, I might have read the signs right then and there. I could have saved the sorry son of a bitch by snapping that thing in half. But I was younger, we all were, and we didn't see any problem with encouraging what we all saw as an incredible experience to be shared with everyone. Now, he didn't have any big radio or television connections, mind you, and the internet wouldn't have come around for more than another decade. So what he did was what all people on a shoestring budget did at the time. He advertised the show with flyers. Now that might not mean anything to you city folk, but in a small town, you post a flyer, it gains a fair glance over from time to time. And what's more, Jake's managed to stick out by having the little figures jump up and down and whatnot to get people's attention. His first show must have gotten nearly 60 or so people, probably a lot more than that. Impressive for a town that size. And his shows from there on were fantastic. Somebody would shout out a scene from a play or a movie or a comedy sketch, and Jake's hand would fly over that white wall like a bird. He'd been holding back when he made that stone, that's for damn sure. His illustrations were all spot on, and he could make an incredible human figure in just minutes. Now, come to think of it, I don't remember any of his scenes lasting more than 10 minutes. They were all really well done scenes, too. I mean, not only could you see a knight charge a castle, Jake would draw the castle's interior as well, like a wedding cake split down the middle, so you could see the knight scale the walls, fight his way through the levels to the dungeon, and fight back out with a princess, and then make a leap and jump off the castle parapets and onto his getaway horse. And it was all in complete silence. Not realistic, no, but that was part of the appeal. None of us went in there expecting something real. When a scene or a sketch was finished, either the characters would leave off the wall or he'd cover the wall with white paint. This was good in a way. It gave the shows a time limit, so that when he'd finished with all 4 walls in the room, everybody knew that the show was over until the paint dried. Meanwhile, Jake was changing in a bad way. I'd mentioned that upon his return he'd been extremely energetic. Well, that energy, that vitality, that verve, whatever you want to call it, it never left him, not for an instant. Now, far from it, it seemed to grow over time, and he enjoyed it all too much. His eyes grew wider, he would gradually sleep less over time. His statements and his opinions always grew more radical and then frenzied. And though he'd never been a pushover, he started to make people nervous in his company, just from that intensity. A month or 2 passed, and Jake's audience grew like wildfire. Nearly everybody in town paid to see Jake's art in action, and he had to rent out larger and larger places for him to sit. Now, he didn't stop after one scene was done. He would move directly on to the next, put on the next blank space on the wall, sometimes to the intriguing effect of causing scenes to mingle, and the crowd just loved it. The subject matter got more wild, more immoral, and the monsters got bizarre and creative, sometimes scary as hell. The fighters would use more impossible weaponry, all for the sake of the crowd's interest. Jake, of course, got steadily more indulgent. You know, we figured it was from the money anyway. He became a drinker and a womanizer, neither of which got rid of that vitality, by the way. And some of those women claimed that they'd woken up in the middle of the night to see him scribbling with a stick on a drawing pad. Had this gigantic grin plastered on his face. And while some of them said that they'd assumed he was drawing them in the nude, there's rumors that one or two of them got glances at the notepad. Those anonymous few supposedly said that those drawings absolutely were not nude pictures. But neither of them, I don't know, whoever they are, will say what he was drawing. Don't bother looking for the notepads or the flyers, though. They're all gone now. I'm getting off track. Point is, he was hitting the bottle, and that's important because it was the drinking that would eventually ruin everything. That last night, one of his regularly scheduled performances, he walked out in front of a cheering crowd, and it was immediately apparent to everybody that he was completely plotzed. I was in the front row, and I could smell the bourbon on him from 10 feet away. The show started, and he went through a bunch of sketches and scenarios that the crowd recommended. When at the end, somebody asked that he draw himself. Everybody cheered at the idea. I guess they'd been wondering what his creations thought of him. And so he eventually obliged. Now, no sooner had Jake finished connecting the final two lines on the code than every single character across that vast expanse of wall all stopped and looked directly at that illustration. Lovers stopped kissing, clowns stopped laughing, robots stopped fighting, pirates, everything screeched to a halt. And all of them looked at the Jacob illustration. The crowd just went silent almost instantly. I remember Jake's face at that moment, pale white, full of terrible comprehension at his mistake, and looking desperately for the cans of white paint that he had forgotten to put out before the show. Everyone else, they were looking at fake Jake. That Jacob reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a black stick of his own, and as we all watched, he drew a door, pushed on his side of the door, and it swung open, allowing him to walk through onto the floor of the auditorium. The rest was an absolute hellish pandemonium. People were screaming and running for the exits as Jacob's characters, both those currently on the wall and those which had previously left before being covered up, ran out of their own exit, throwing pies, shooting lasers, blowing fire and poison and just impossible stuff. I was near enough the exit to be one of the few who got out, and I only gave one backward glance. That scene, that'll haunt me forever. Jacob was being dragged by his creations, kicking and screaming through the door that the copy had made. The auditorium burned down. With all that going on, it was going to be destroyed one way or the other, but I have no idea how many characters escaped, how many people either. What happened to fake Emory, or how many people died. The fire brought the fire department from the nearest cities. Some of them came from up to 100 miles away. They in turn brought the police force, which brought the government, which hushed up everything. They took the flyers and any art that Jake had made and swore everyone to secrecy, or else lifetime detainment. The fire was blamed on a cigarette in the garbage during a basketball game, and we all eventually went on with our lives. Jacob was made to never have existed. In retrospect, I see it all a little clearer. Jacob hadn't been creating illustrations. Illustrations don't move, much less act or attack or take revenge. They're just images people see, shadows made to look like real things. Jacob had been making life, actual, thinking things in some alternate dimension, using a power that was never meant to fall to mortal hands. He'd gotten drunk on that power. And his punishment, if you think about it, was probably well deserved. Yeah, and incidentally, the government screwed up their cover-up on 2 accounts. They did a damn good job of silencing everyone, but the proof is still there. The ruins, they're still there, you know. The auditorium ruins. I hear they're going to start reconstruction soon, and that'll wipe out any remaining evidence that someone can still see, but I went back there once, several years after the fire. Just that once. And in amidst the rubble, covered in ash, I saw something squirming. I looked closer, and it was Jacob Emory's hand on that wall. It was exactly like it had been 3 years ago. Sweaty, but calloused. But it was flailing constantly, as if the body it was supposed to be attached to was still burning. That was mistake number 1. Number 2 were the creations. The ones that got out. Like I said, I don't know how many escaped, or how many the government agents found, or caught, or hunted down. But I'll say only this. Those tall grass meadows on the outskirts of town, don't go into them. Ever. You were asking about those white figures that you've seen at night, right? I told you. This town doesn't have ghost stories. Man makes life in his own image. Creation destroys creator. I feel like I've heard this story before. I'll figure it out. Anyway, my wildlings, stay scary. Don't forget your pre-show prep, and make the most of your nights.